Playing the guitar with squeaks is a lot like trying to have a conversation with someone while you're uncontrollably ripping ass. But I don't think that's a perfectly fair comparison because at least when you're puffing your pants it has some comedic value, and squeaks on the guitar just sound like shit. The good news is that they're completely avoidable and completely under your control. We're about to go into a fuck ton of detail so that you understand exactly why squeaks happen and how to prevent them in any situation. And there are two main scenarios where squeaks happen. One is when you lift, and the other is when you slide. And I'm going to break these into two videos, starting with the lifts for a couple reasons. The first is that some of the techniques we'll be learning for the lifts will be necessary for understanding the slides. And the second is that the kind of layering of tactics we're going to be using to solve the lift squeak issue actually has a huge effect on the way the left hand works. And it makes it a lot more fluid, a lot more effortless. It just happens to have some overlap with squeaking. So here's what causes the squeak. And if you have your guitar lying around, feel free to pick it up so we can do this together. So let's take a finger, put it directly down onto a fret, and lift it directly off the fret. No squeak. Let's do the same thing, put the finger directly down onto the fret, and now we're going to add another force going either up the string or down the string. We'll hold that force in and lift, and we get the squeak. So this force up or down the string, I'm going to call a directional force. And for all the terminology I use in this video, I have no idea if anybody else uses it, but it felt right to call it that. So we have this directional force built into the string. And what's happening is it's building in friction between the fingertip and the string, so that when you release it, the string scrapes against the fingertip, causing the squeak. Here's a couple things to keep in mind. This directional force, what it feels like, is a tugging sensation between the fingertip and the string. So it doesn't matter what part of the finger goes onto the string. What matters is if you feel that tugging sensation either up or down the string. And here's the other thing, that you don't have to be fully fretting a note to get the squeak. Any amount of pressure onto the string and any amount of directional force instantly broken is going to get a squeak. You can generally clean up a lot of squeaks in your playing just by not lazily dragging your fingers around the bass strings and by being aware when you have the directional force applied. But it's not always so simple in practice because there's something that we unknowingly do that builds in directional force into our playing, and I'm going to call that the anchor squeak. In our playing, usually two things need to be true to get an anchor squeak. The first is that our hand is either stretching or compressing to reach a note, and the second is that we're using a finger as an anchor to get there. And an anchor is when you use a finger as a sort of pivot point to reach another finger further than your muscles or natural reach are accounting for. So the anchoring finger grabs onto the string and relies on the pressure down into the string to create that distance. And when I do that, it's building in directional force, causing the squeak. And it's the same for compressing as well. So let's say if I want to take my first finger and my third finger and put them on adjacent strings, same fret. So I use my muscle to get into this position, but now I'm going to relax my hand. And now what's happening is my third finger has directional force going down the string, so when I lift, I squeak. So this type of stretching and compressing with an anchor can happen with multiple fingers at the same time, and with tiny distances just as much as big distances. So with an anchor, we can stretch further, but we squeak. So how do we get our fingers to land directly on top of and lift directly off of notes, no matter what kind of crazy shit we're playing? And the answer to that isn't really one solution, but more of a layering of tactics. Any examples I'm about to play are purely to explain the concepts. If you can play some of these things without squeaking, good for you. but I think that you could find situations in your own music where these ideas could come in handy. So let's start by going from our fourth to our second finger, somewhere in the first position. And again, if we use the anchor, we feel the pressure going down, feel the directional force being applied, the tugging, and then lift, we're going to get a squeak. So the first tactic layer is going to be using the muscles in your hand to actively spread your fingers apart, or in some cases, compress them together. So I'm going to use my muscles to pull the fingers apart, and now my fingers are lifting and setting directly off of the string. So this is a step in the right direction, but I think it's where a lot of players will run into a wall, because using this muscle activation, this muscle tension, can be really exhausting over time. And also, it won't really allow you to hit all the notes that you're trying to hit anyway. So how do we find that distance without the tension that comes with muscle activation? And that's where our second tactic layer comes into play, and that is hand position. I'm going to slightly turn my wrist to where my fingers more easily align with the frets. And now I'm not even using any muscle activation to find that distance. I'm using the hand's natural range of movement to do most of the work for me. And what I mean by the hand's natural range of movement are all the ways that I can bring my fingers to the fretboard with minimal tension. It breaks this idea of having this perfect left hand position and changes it into constantly adjusting our hand position so that we can find the perfect fit for every situation. So that by the time we set our fingers down on the frets, our hand position has done most of the work for us and removes the need for a lot of muscle activation. This little change in hand positions just scratches the surface. So let's get a fuller picture. There are two main dimensions that we work with. The first stems from rotating the forearm, and the second stems from extending the wrist. And these dimensions and positions are spectrums that we kind of fluidly move in and out of. But I'm going to show them to you in a vacuum first before merging these ideas together. One dimension is the palm in and palm out positions. And I don't know if there's a common terminology for this, but that's what I'm calling it. This is initiated by rotating the forearm. And this will be necessary to understand slides in the next video. So with the palm in position, I'm going to have my palm facing in towards the guitar. And I'm going to bring my fingers to the first string because that's where the effect is most pronounced. So one thing you'll notice is that my index finger is pretty curled in. I like to call it shrimpified. So I've got a shrimpified first finger, and then every finger that comes out after gets a bit more extended. So let's go to the palm out position. So now we're going to face our palm away from the guitar, bring our fingers in, and now our pinky is shrimpified, and then every other finger that comes after gets a bit more extended, and our index finger is pointing out and back. One of the things to notice is what the thumb does with these positions. So in the palm in position, the thumb likes to stay a bit relatively higher on the neck. And in the palm out position, it likes to stay relatively lower on the neck. So these are a spectrum of positions, and you can move all the way between them, but somewhere in the middle where the hand is parallel with the neck, I call that the textbook position because it looks like what you would see in a textbook. Let's take a look at a scale with each of these positions, and we'll start with the palm in position. You'll notice as I make my way down the strings, there's a lot less wiggle room with the palm, so it kind of evens itself out as you make your way down. Now let's take a look at the textbook position. And now the palm out position. I'm playing scales for demonstration purposes, but these positions apply to everything you play. For example, cowboy chords feel really good with the palm in position. And then maybe like the A minor chord starting on the 6th string, Feels really good with the palm out position. I feel like I should give more examples for the palm out, but I'm feeling lazy right now. So next section. The other dimension has the tight and the loose positions. And I don't know if anybody calls them this, but that's what I'm sticking to. For the tight position, we'll have our wrists in line and straight with our forearm. And you'll notice that the fingers curve nicely right on top of the frets. But the distance that we can naturally spread our fingers apart is pretty short. So let's go ahead and extend the wrist out. And now we're in the loose position to where our fingers can now spread apart much further. One thing you can notice is how the thumb behaves in each of these. So in the tight position, the thumb remains relatively higher on the neck. In the loose position, the thumb comes a little bit lower on the neck. And there's a good chance you're already using the tight and loose positions because while the loose position gives us a nicer spread of our fingers, it also allows us to avoid the neck as we're going down to the bass string. So just real quick, I'll go from top to bottom of the scale and notice how I can start in a tight position, go to the loose position, and come back up to the tight position. We should only use the loose position when we need it to reach something, whether it's bass notes or a spread of notes, because the tight position is a lot more stable and efficient overall, especially for things like slurs. So the way I think about it is that my tight position is my default position, and then I use the loose position purely out of necessity and then come right back to the tight position when I can. And now we've taken a look at the range of positions that complement different situations on the fretboard. But things are rarely static when we play guitar, so the third and final tactic layer is how we can effortlessly move between them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that anchor from earlier and transform it into something that I'll call a gentle pivot. So in its anchor form, let's say if I'm going from 2 to 1, skipping a fret in between, in its anchor form, it's going to grab onto the string, pull it to create the distance, creating the directional force, so I know when it lifts, it's going to squeak. In the gentle pivot form, I'm going to have that second finger staying in contact with the string, but allow my hand to move in all these positions around it. And in all these different positions, it's really just changing the fingertips' orientation to the note. The pressure is still going directly down into the fret. But we're creating all this space with all these options and doing this. So for this situation, find something that feels good here. A lot of loose positions actually feel good with this, so we have those options and we can kind of feel it out. And now I'm just lifting and setting directly on and off the fret. So you can't be rigid when trying to find these different positions. It's almost like if you take a chicken and pick it up and then move its body around, but its head stays like in the same place. That's what it feels like for this. The fingers just gently, directly down on the fret. Everything else is very fluid, just moving all around it. And just to drive this point home, why you don't really need to push or pull, and why being too rigid will not help you with this, is I can pick a point in space, and I'll just pick it right here off the strings. I'll put my second finger here, and I can move my entire hand position around this point in space. And it's very easy, and it feels like it's a dance between my hand and the point at which my fingertip is trying to stay directly down for. And you can practice the gentle pivot just by picking a finger, picking a fret, and noticing all the positions that you can get your hand into naturally, while also maintaining pressure down onto the fret. So there's my second finger there. I'm going to try my third finger here. Okay, I'm noticing all these positions. Yep. Fourth finger. All right. Just noticing where my other fingers want to land up when I do things like this. There's an example of me using this gentle pivot in the demo tune. There are a lot of examples of me using it in there, but this one is visually, I guess, a bit more impactful. So I'm going from this note here to this note up here, down to here. So a lot of stretching, potentially. So starting off with this note, my wrist is straight, so in the tight and loose dimension, it's in the tight part of that. And for the palm in and palm out dimension, it's right in the middle, so that's the textbook position. So starting off in a tight textbook position. From there, I'm going to try to get my fourth finger up here. So in order to do that, I need to go into a palm out position. And to give myself a bit more space, I'm going to go into a loose position. So moving to palm out and loose. And now I can lift directly off this. I know there's no directional pressure. To go back down to this one, I'm going to just drop myself back into a textbook position while I'm still in the loose position. So again, and it feels really easy to do that. And it's a lot of frets to stretch too, so it's kind of nice to have this option whenever you want it. The gentle pivot can be used a lot more subtly too. And I use it pretty much all the time when I'm playing anything because it makes playing so much easier. So I'm going to take a scale and I'm going to exaggerate the pivoting movements, and then I'll do it again without the exaggerations. So my dog is chewing on something down there. Try to ignore that sound. Okay. So with exaggeration. And now, more normal. And I can't describe how wonderfully lazy that feels on the left hand. It's very efficient. And finally, I'm going to go over a real-world example of something that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and that's the third movement of the cathédrale. And I'm finding out I'm really bad at talking and playing at the same time, so hopefully you guys can like visually see what's going on. I'm going to try to talk through it. So our first pivot is here. Changing the position. I have another pivot here from the third and fourth finger. And another pivot here. Here's how we can include all of these ideas in our practice. And if you're intimidated, you really don't need to be, because there are a couple of simple angles that we can approach this from. The first is by just feeling everything out. So notice what it feels like to gingerly step directly onto the string and directly off of the string. Notice any tugging sensations you might feel when you're applying directional force, and just readjust the hand until you find a place where you don't feel it anymore. So just by allowing the body to feel all these sensations and do its own tinkering, it goes a really long way. Sometimes squeaks are a bit more elusive to solve, or you might be of the mindset where you really would like to have a deliberate approach to this. So if that's the case, I would say step one is simply to have your ears become more attuned to the sound of the squeak. So if you hear a squeak, then you go to step two. And step two is where you find out what built in the directional force in the first place and what combination of muscle activation or hand positioning you're going to use to solve it. Then once you figure that out, you can go to step three. And step three would be implementing the fix on a very small scale to where you're doing a lot of controlled repetitions of the least amount of notes possible to get it right. And if you're fucking it up, you're probably playing it too fast. And slow is a lot slower than most people think, especially if you're doing something new with your technique. So lots of really slow, very correct repetitions with what you decided. And then you can start adding music in around it, speeding it up a bit, things like that. And if you apply this kind of care with anything that squeaks on the guitar, your hand will automatically begin to do this little dainty squeak prevention dance, which is great because it helps with everything you play on the guitar, not just with squeaking on the bass strings. All right, that's it for lifting squeaks. Part 2 with the slides should be out pretty soon. If you have any questions on this topic or have any ideas of a topic you'd like for me to cover in a future video, please leave a comment. And there's a lot of nuance with technique in classical guitar playing, so it's taken me a long time to analyze this to make sure I wasn't serving up anything half-baked. So if you found this helpful, I'd be really grateful if you left a like or even subscribe to my channel. And I also teach lessons, so if you'd like some more guidance with your guitar playing, I'd be happy to help. All right, peace.